So you might have missed this, but last month, the celebrity exorcist character, Catholic priest Father Chad Ripperger, was platformed on a very popular US podcast called the Shawn Ryan Podcast. This is a show that gets millions of monthly views, and I think that we need to spend some time talking about the things that he had to say in this podcast and what I believe, in my opinion, could be some really unfortunate outcomes and consequences of the rhetoric that he is espousing. Now, if this is the first video of mine that you've clicked on, hi, hello, my name is Beck Griffin. This is the Deep Dive Project. This is my venture in independent citizen journalism. And over the last year and a half or so, I have been becoming acquainted with the world of the Catholic celebrity exorcist and the topic of deliverance ministry within the Catholic Church more broadly. And it's a very, very interesting rabbit hole. Things are definitely not all that they appear to be, in my opinion. And there are a few characters in this celebrity exorcist ecosystem that stand out and are particularly prominent. And Father Chad Ripperger is one of those people. He is probably one of the most well-known and most well-recognized celebrity Catholic exorcists. He has written books, he gives talks, he goes on podcasts like the Shawn Ryan Podcast, and he has a lot of opinions, and in my opinion, takes some liberties with a number of religious and spiritual concepts, extrapolating them out into creating what is, in essence, in my opinion, like a fantasy world, basically, in which he has all of the information. He understands everything that there is to know about the world, and he is the one who knows how to safely navigate it and how to fight back against these evil spiritual forces that he is convinced that we are all in battle against, whether we recognize it or not. Now, I know that that is a lot, but this, like I said, is really such a deep rabbit hole, and there is a lot of ground to cover when it comes to this subject. So the track that I have been taking in order to introduce my audience to these people and to this subject as a whole has been to seek out articles, pre-existing literature about these people and about these subjects, reading them on this channel and giving my opinion, perspective, and insight, and kind of introducing you all to this world in that way, just because I think that that is one of the more convenient ways of gathering a lot of information on a very complex web of characters and situations, turning it into something that is a bit more palatable and easy to digest. Now, with that being said, you are not going to probably come away with like a comprehensive understanding of everything there is to know about deliverance ministry or about celebrity exorcists, particularly within the Catholic Church, from watching just one of my videos like this talking about these people, because like I said, this is like a very complex, multifaceted thing. There are a lot of different angles to it. There's quite a bit of depth and context as well. And so it's going to take some time to make our way through all of this information, build out the web, as it were, and kind of get our bearings in this world. So this is a third video that I have published. I believe I'm up to 3 videos now that I have done, focusing specifically on the celebrity exorcist phenomena and my concerns about the potential negative outcomes of the rhetoric that these people are promoting. And I'm really looking forward to taking you guys through this interview today, because it's really, really interesting, and I think that Chad inadvertently tells on himself in a number of different points, and you're going to see what I mean as we make our way through this. Now, I do want to make a couple of quick disclaimers before we get into this, because I know that because of the subject matter, there are likely going to be some people who come to my channel and find this video because they are fans of Chad Ripperger or his deliverance ministry, or are just fans of the concept of like a spiritual battle with demons or whatever. And right out the gate, I want to make sure and stress that I say that I am not against anyone believing whatever they want to believe. I believe in religious liberty. I think that it's a human right. And I support your right to believe whatever you want to believe, whatever helps you move through the world and be a better person while you're doing it. I'm obviously going to be in support of those kinds of things. I'm not here to gatekeep or dictate what anyone should or shouldn't believe. I wouldn't want anyone to do that to me, so I'm not going to do that to anyone else. But with that said, there comes a point where you do kind of have to address the elephant in the room when the conversation crosses a line to where it could be encouraging people to engage in practices that are harmful, could be encouraging people to distrust modern medicine, distrust the services and resources that we have to help people. Things that encourage kind of like unhealthy lifestyle choices. When you cross that line and you get into that realm to where the beliefs that you are espousing are encouraging harm towards people, any people, or towards the world in general, because we all have to live on this planet together, at that point, it becomes a problem for me. At that point, in my opinion, it becomes a matter of public concern. And that is where I feel things are at with this whole celebrity exorcist conversation, and with Chad Ripperger in particular. And that is all just my opinion. Of course, I'm not here to make any accusations. I'm not here to hurl any like accusations of anything. Everything that I say in this video is a representation of my opinion based on what I have read and what I have heard and people that I have talked to. And you should take everything that I say with a grain of salt. Don't assume that what I am saying is the 100% fact. You know, I'm just taking the information that I have available to me and reading it and then offering my opinion on it, which I am perfectly entitled to do. The other thing that I want to say is that I am coming at this from the perspective of a person who was at one point a Catholic. I was raised cradle Catholic in a conservative Catholic family in the American Midwest, but I am no longer Catholic. So I say that all to say that I have a very good understanding of what a normal, like, functioning Catholic life should look like. I am pretty well versed in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I have a good understanding of Catholic doctrine, of most theology. I know the ins and outs of the Mass and the prayers, and trust me, I received a very, very comprehensive catechetical religious upbringing, because that was something that was very, very important to my parents. But that does not mean that I am here coming as like an expert on the Catholic Church or anything like that. That is not the case whatsoever. And obviously, I'm coming at this now as an outsider, as someone who has left the church as an adult and kind of coming back in retrospect. So keep that in mind. I will be doing my best to speak factually, particularly when I am taking issue with like something specific that Chad has to say in regard to like a position of the Catholic Church. Obviously, there are things that I went back and like fact checked before I sat down to film this video. But again, I'm not here to be an authority, but I do have a pretty good understanding of the Catholic world as a whole, particularly here socially in America, what that looks like and how that operates and everything. So I feel like I need to give these disclaimers. I apologize if you think that this is like belaboring the point or anything like that, but I just know that there are going to be people who are going to come out and try to come at me sideways because they do not like the fact that I am expressing the opinions that I am about people who they view as holy and very reliable and very trustworthy in every way. I think that it would be better, honestly, if somebody who was a current practicing Catholic was very like invested and plugged into like the life of the church and everything, particularly here in the United States. It would be better if someone like that would sit down and like start going through all of this stuff with these Catholic celebrity exorcists. I'm not saying that I'm the best person to do it, but that conversation seems to be like a very slow one in getting it started. It doesn't really seem like it's entered the mainstream in any real way. And if I have to bridge that gap, then I will, because the fact of the matter is there are people in our society, in certain sectors of society, promoting some rhetoric that I really do not think is positive or beneficial, and that will bleed out into the rest of society and impact everyone, regardless of whether or not you are familiar with these people and their beliefs and how they view the world or anything like that. So, with all of that said, I know this is a very long intro, but again, I just want to make sure we're all kind of on the same page as we're proceeding forward. Links for all the articles that I am going to be reading today are in a source document down below. Please make full use of it. Disclaimer, viewer discretion is advised. We're going to be talking about some really difficult topics. I'm not going to bury the lead there on that whatsoever. Please keep your mental health in mind as we are going through and talking about these issues. I have mental health resources down below if you are someone that is in need of support. So please reach out if you do need help. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. And with all of that said, let's go ahead and I'm going to get into the first article that I have, which will kind of orient us on the whole interview in case you haven't listened to the entire thing. So this first article is from Info Vaticana, which is a website that is a little bit more traditional, a little bit more conservative. They have written, favorable publications about like Opus Dei, for example, which is a conservative Catholic organization that I've devoted a lot of time and attention to talking about. And I wouldn't say that I view Info Vaticana as like a bastion of journalistic integrity. I would say take it with a grain of salt what you have to read here. Obviously, maybe it should go without saying, I don't know, but this is going to be like a friendly article about Chad Ripperger and his interview and the things that he had to say. But with all that said, I do think it will give us a good overview and also kind of introduce you to Ripperger as a character if you are unacquainted up to now. So this was published on March 8th, 2026. Chad Ripperger denounces a compromised hierarchy and speaks of dark practices in the Vatican upper echelons. The well-known American priest assures in an interview on one of the most watched channels in the United States that during exorcisms, names, rituals, and crimes related to members of the hierarchy have come to light. His words once again focus attention on the moral crisis in the church. So, a very lengthy interview granted by the American priest Chad Ripperger, one of the most well-known exorcists in the world, has unleashed a strong commotion in Catholic circles and on social media. The conversation, broadcast on the popular Shawn Ryan podcast, exceeds 4 hours and delves fully into issues that rarely appear exposed with such rawness in a format of great audience reach: demonology, spiritual warfare, occultism, satanic rituals, and, above all, the possibility that part of the ecclesiastical structure has been morally and spiritually corrupted. The interview has gained particular interest, not so much for its reference to spiritual combat used for an exorcist, as for the statements Ripperger makes about the Vatican and members of the hierarchy. I'm going to be drawing attention to it for some other different reasons, but it was interesting. If you haven't heard the entire interview and you feel like reading through it, I will be linking a transcript. That's what I used to go through his interview. I didn't sit and listen to the full thing. I found it online. It's still very, very long, but it's a little bit easier to read than it is to listen to, I think. And since I'm not going to be going point by point, I'm mainly just going to be calling out the things that I noticed that stuck out to me as really odd. If you want to see it in all its glory, you can access that transcript down below. And I don't know, maybe I didn't finish my thought fully perfectly earlier when I was talking about how, I'm coming at this thing as someone who's an outsider and not a Catholic any longer. All that just to say, I'm trying to like cite my sources and everything like that, and just like point out what stood out to me as problematic. And I do think it would be a really good idea for someone who is very well versed in like Catholic Church doctrine and the catechism, and including like canon law, to sit down and take like a really hard look at what Chad is actually saying, the words that are coming out of his mouth when he gives these talks and these podcast interviews, particularly the podcast interviews, where he is basically allowed to just sit and like verbally just like vomit words for hours and hours, like stream of consciousness style. It's amazing the things that come out of this man's mouth. And I really think that somebody besides me needs to be taking a really close critical look at that. Anyway, I'll read on. So Chad assures that in various exorcisms, demons have mentioned names, specific rituals, and serious crimes linked to people in positions of authority within the church. According to him, these are not isolated episodes or personal intuitions, but a pattern that, he claims, other exorcists have also found in different cases. So who is Chad Ripperger? Ripperger is not an unknown priest or a peripheral figure in the traditional Catholic world. Ordained in 1997, he holds a doctorate in philosophy and theology and is the founder of the Society of the Most Sorrowful Mother, a religious community based in Denver known for its dedication to the ministry of deliverance and exorcism. So I want to draw special attention to the credentials that it says that he has. He is an ordained priest and has been since 1997, and he holds a doctorate, so you know, a PhD level education in specifically philosophy and theology. So keep that in mind. Those are his like educational credentials, basically, background in philosophy and theology specifically. Okay. For years, he has become a reference for many priests interested in practical demonology, spiritual theology, and the pastoral application of Thomistic tradition. Natural law and Thomas Aquinas are a big deal to this guy. His intellectual profile has decisively contributed to that notoriety. He is the author of several books on psychology. Okay, remember what I said about his credentials and what they were? And it says here that he's written several books on psychology. Psychology is a very specific discipline, is it not? I don't know that it is exactly the same as, say, philosophy or theology. It's a little different. No. Something to think about. So that mix of philosophical training, casuistry of exorcisms, and direct language has given him a singular authority among Catholic sectors that believe the current church has relegated preaching about the devil, sin, and judgment. So very much like a kind of sort of like fire and brimstone type thing. Everything with this guy, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you now, it's the demons. For Chad, it's the demons with everything, anything and everything. But you will see. Precisely for the reason that he's this authority, what Ripperger says is not usually received as mere eccentricity. So people are giving real weight to the things that he has to say. And his figure carries weight in a realm where exorcists are listened to attentively and where spiritual warfare is not considered a metaphor, but a concrete reality. Okay, so people are taking the things that Chad is saying as statements of fact with real world impacts on their immediate lives. Okay. The interview with Shawn Ryan, in that sense, is not just another eye-catching chat. It is the entry of a very specific discourse from traditional Catholicism into a massive showcase. And I have noticed a couple of articles from pretty well-known and well-read legacy media outlets platforming more of Chad's ideas since this podcast came out. And we're going to take a look at one of those here in a minute. So they talk about his claims pointing to the Vatican. He has all of these theories about why things in the church are the way that they are. Spoiler alert, it's the demons. scrolling through here, it says that what he offers is not a journalistic denunciation in a strict sense, but a spiritual reading of the ecclesial crises supported by years of ministry, comparison of cases, and coincidence of data that he claims have appeared again and again. We are asked to take his word for it when it comes to this data and these statistics, which he likes to cite. He never bothers to mention where that data comes from, where these statistics are being gathered from, but he does let slip in this interview that his order, the DeLorean Fathers or whatever they are, his order of exorcists basically, are gathering data and keep statistics on things pertaining to the demonic, basically. And no word on how they're analyzing that data, the size of their population, how they're analyzing and running their statistics and their statistical analyses. Nothing like that. But they have these statistics and this data, and we're expected to take their word on it, to take Chad's word on the fact that it indicates something concrete about the presence of demons in our world, basically. Says the interest awakened by this interview is not explained solely by morbidity. It also responds to a very precise ecclesial and social context. For years, too many Catholics heard that certain denunciations were exaggerations, fantasies, or attacks on the church, until the reality of abuses and cover-ups finally came to light with devastating force. That precedent makes many faithful today not react with automatic incredulity when a priest speaks of rot in the hierarchy. And of course, I think that's perfectly logical. People want to understand why things have played out in the Catholic Church the way that they have, why there is this legacy of trauma and abuse, why that appears to be something that is so impossible to grapple with. And of course, whenever there are people grasping for reasons, there will be people who are willing to come forward and provide definitive, certain guarantees, even when they are unqualified to do so, or when it is actually impossible to actually provide any certainty, because the world is full of nuance, and the reality lies not in the black and white, but somewhere in the gray. But people want the black and white, and so there are people who will give them that black and white. And I think, in my opinion, Chad Ripperger is one of those people. And I've talked about this in the past, but when you are living through scary times, when there is political upheaval, economic uncertainty, geopolitical turmoil, people feel very unsettled and disturbed by that. And they are sometimes going to look for comfort by going to extremes, by seeking out kind of extreme perspectives and extreme talking points and extreme ideas. They turn to fanaticism and radicalism, basically. And that's something that has been hijacked and utilized and implemented in political movements all throughout history. And the role that people like Chad play in negatively impacting how society grapples with the myriad difficult issues that we have, again, in my opinion, cannot be overstated. The conversation with Shawn Ryan leaves an unequivocal impression. Chad Ripperger does not see the church's situation as a mere administrative, doctrinal, or disciplinary crisis. No, it can't be anything concrete or already identified. It must be something else. It can't be the reasons that so many victim survivors have already raised the alarm over it being. It can't be for any of the reasons that sociologists and psychologists and researchers have already identified are the reasons. Must not be any of those things. And it certainly must not be a systemic thing, right? No, there must be something else. And people like Chad are willing to provide that something else. And Chad sees it as a spiritual battle of dramatic proportions. And in that battle, according to his reading, and that's an important point to underline here, the editorializing that is happening with some of the things that he has to say. So it's according to his perspective and his twist on things. Part of the ecclesial power would have yielded ground in an alarming way. His words are harsh, uncomfortable, and in some points extremely delicate. I think that's a matter of opinion, but they touch a fiber that today beats strongly in many Catholics: the conviction that the church faces not only human errors, but a profoundly spiritual offensive that has reached even places where holiness should be guarded with greater zeal. It remains to be seen how far the impact of this interview will go, but one thing seems clear: when an exorcist with Ripperger's visibility speaks of compromised hierarchies, darkness in the top echelons, and internal resistance to those who want to bring these issues to light, silence is no longer as easy as before. Now, that all may be true, and I definitely think that there are, even a broken clock is right twice a day, right? I'm not going to come out and say that I think that Chad Ripperger is flat out incorrect on every single position and every single talking point. That's painting with a very, very broad brush. But I do question how valuable his insights are, considering some of the other things that he has to say. And at this point, we're going to start transitioning into a conversation about mental health, because for me, and when it comes to the celebrity exorcist deliverance ministry ecosystem, the part that is the most concerning to me, the part that waves the biggest red flag, is the apparent blatant disregard in a number of exorcist communities for the very real existence of mental illness and how it manifests and how it appears. And look, I'm gonna just go ahead and say it. I think that maybe it's possible that the reason why that is getting missed and bypassed is because, unfortunately, very few, if any, of these people that are in this ecosystem are actually qualified to be giving opinions and waxing eloquent about mental health, mental illness, treating mental illnesses, what different types of mental illnesses look like, and why they manifest. They're not qualified to be doing that. I am not qualified to be doing that. And so I want to read you through some facts here about a particular mental health condition that I am concerned that people who suffer may be at risk of suffering some really negative outcomes by being exposed to the types of rhetoric that people like Chad are promoting. Okay, and just stick with me here. I think I'm going to be building my case as I go along, and hopefully you'll see where I'm coming from with this, because I'm really not being hyperbolic here at all, guys. I am very, very concerned about the implications for this rhetoric. So we're going to be talking about religious OCD, which is also known as scrupulosity. And this is a webpage summary. I have linked this webpage summary and the search results under it in the source document. So if you would like to click on that and read through some of these references, if you'd like to learn more about religious OCD, please do, because I think that this is something that more people, particularly people who are really involved in religious communities, need to be aware of. So, religious OCD, also known as scrupulosity, is a subtype of obsessive-compulsive disorder where faith turns into fear, characterized by intrusive, distressing thoughts and compulsive behaviors related to religion, morality, and ethics. Unlike typical religious devotion, these symptoms are irrational, excessive, and time-consuming, often leading to severe guilt, anxiety, and a disruption of daily life. So some of the key signs and symptoms are individuals with religious OCD experience a distinct relationship with their faith marked by specific obsessions and compulsions. Intrusive thoughts, persistent and unwanted thoughts about blasphemy, sinning, or offending God, often including fears of being possessed or committing unintentional moral wrongs. Keep that in mind. Also excessive guilt and anxiety, with this constant sense of being spiritually impure, morally flawed, or unworthy, even for minor or imagined mistakes. Then there's repetitive rituals, compulsions, such as repetitive prayers. Okay, remember that. Confessions, often to religious authorities, and purification ceremonies performed to neutralize anxiety or ensure perfection. There's seeking reassurance, where there's a relentless need to ask religious leaders, family, or peers for confirmation of one's moral standing or faithfulness. Avoidance behaviors, such as steering clear of situations, places, or activities that might trigger religious doubt or perceived moral contamination. And then mental scrutiny, which is endless self-examination of thoughts and actions to ensure they align perfectly with religious standards, often leading to an inability to sleep or function normally. So these are problems that could have a tremendously negative impact on an individual's quality of life and their relationships and everything. Some common triggers of religious OCD, there often is exacerbated by a combination of genetic, neurological, and environmental factors. Religious upbringing is a big one. Exposure to rigid doctrines or teachings that emphasize strict moral codes and severe consequences for sin can increase susceptibility. Stress and trauma and significant life stressors, traumatic events, or past experiences related to religion can act as catalysts for the onset of symptoms. Personality traits like pre-existing tendencies towards perfectionism, high anxiety, sensitivity, and an exaggerated sense of personal responsibility. Moral thought-action fusion, which is the belief that having an intrusive thought is morally equivalent to actually committing the act, leading to intense fear of bad thoughts. And intolerance of uncertainty, which is a deep-seated inability to accept doubt regarding one's faith or moral standing, driving the need for absolute certainty through rituals. And it's important to distinguish faith from religious OCD because there is a difference between genuine religious devotion and religious OCD, and the latter is a legitimate mental health disorder rather than a reflection of one's character or true beliefs, or, and I'm going to say this, evidence of a demonic oppression or possession. Okay. Devout individuals find peace and comfort in their practices, whereas those with scrupulosity tend to experience intense anxiety, fear, and distress when engaging in or failing to perform religious acts. Treatment typically involves exposure and response prevention therapy and cognitive behavioral strategies to help individuals tolerate uncertainty and break the cycle of obsessions and compulsions. So again, there is no stressing how real of a condition this is, how negative it can be for a person who is suffering it. And I think as we go through and start digging into the things that Chad had to say in this interview, I want you to keep what we've just talked about here in the back of your mind and just question whether or not the things that Chad has to say would potentially help a person who is dealing with a mental illness, maybe something like religious OCD, which is very, very common amongst religious people. It's really important to focus in on that and to think about the impact of the things that he's saying and how that might actually impact a person's life. And I think as we move through, like I said, you're going to kind of start seeing what I mean. But I wanted to read through this little blurb about religious OCD first, because I think it's something that more people need to know about, especially people in religious communities, because again, it's something that, based on what I have been reading, a large percentage, a not insignificant percentage of people in religious communities and church communities and things like that will deal with, will suffer. And some of the things that people like Chad are saying, I have concerns that they would not help someone who's in a situation like this, or, you know, dealing with something like depression or anxiety. So this is the transcript page. Like I said, I have this linked down below in the source document if you want to read through it. It is really, really long. It took me a few weeks of like going through bit by bit and just like reading through it, trying to pick through what I wanted to like respond to. And again, like I said, this is not a point-by-point refutation or anything like that. I'm not coming out saying that I think that like everything that he had to say was wrong, or that, you know, there wasn't some truth to some of the things that he said or anything like that, because again, I really don't think that that matters in the grand scheme of things with the issues that I think that I am picking up on here, which all have to do with how Chad Ripperger views mental health and mental illness. And I guess I'll just go ahead and say it now. It's the demons. It's all the demons in his view. So this was episode number 285 on the Shawn Ryan Show. Like I had read earlier, it's more than 4 hours long. It is really, really lengthy. And so what I did is I went through and I read it, and I basically in my journal planner, I wrote down the points that stood out to me that I knew that I wanted to talk about. And I have something like 20 points here. So we're going to be making our way through, and yeah, we're gonna work our way through it. It's really something. But again, if you can just bear with me here, give me some of your time. I like I said, I'm concerned. I'm just concerned about the things that he's saying and the potential impact of the things that he is saying. And the interview starts off right out the gate with a bang. They start off talking about UFOs and aliens and whether or not they are demonic. And of course, spoiler alert, in Chad's view, they certainly could be. And from what I understand, based on what I was reading, the idea that aliens or UFOs are demonic is not like an unknown or like completely unheard of concept in like some fringe like Catholic communities and amongst certain Catholic writers and theologians. But based on what I was reading, the Roman Catholic Church does not teach that UFOs and aliens are like demonic as a matter of doctrine. And in fact, they actually say that like, you know, God's creation is so vast and diverse and unlimited that like it is possible that there could be other life in the universe, and that possibility does not ipso facto make everything about like Christianity or Catholicism invalid or anything like that, or make like belief in God a problem or anything like that. So I thought that was interesting. I wanted to put that out there. I feel like a lot of people heard that statement like, oh yeah, aliens are potentially demonic. Seems like they're demonic to me. And people go, oh yeah, that makes sense. And I just want to point out for the record, for anyone listening who is Catholic, the Catholic Church doesn't actually teach that. That's an opinion, it would seem to me, that Chad has. Then they go on to talking about aliens and Epstein, and that really seemed like a big nothing burger. And by his own admission, Chad knows absolutely nothing about the Epstein files or the victims or why people, these elites, have been doing what they've been doing. And it's really, really obvious because in the interview, Shawn Ryan asks Chad if he's been following any of the developments with the Epstein files. And he says something like, yeah, kind of like from a distance. So he's not actually been engaging with the subject. He hasn't been going to justice.gov/Epstein and like reading the files or anything like that. Lord knows where he is getting his information from. Based on what he says in this interview, I'm inclined to believe he's getting it from the demons. It's the demons. It's all the demons. So I that really frustrated me, honestly, the fact that he would like opine and speculate about the victims and the like Epstein files situation at all, when it's really, really clear that he hasn't actually critically engaged with the subject matter in any sort of substantial way. And that seems to be something of a trend based on what I have been seeing. And it's like, in lieu of logic, again, it's like everything is demons, and he wants to blame everything on these demons that he like names. Like there's this demon of fear that he talks about, which is more editorializing. I looked it up, and based on what I was reading, the Catholic Church does not teach about like these specific named demons that like go out and harass people or anything like that, like the demon of fear or the demon of lust or the demon of Eve or whatever, anything like that. Like that is not catechetically based in anything whatsoever. Again, it seems like it's more editorializing from Chad. Then they talk about, again, in the vein of naming these demons, they talk about Beelzebub and his fifis, basically how he feels about like the spiritual battle and everything. And basically Beelzebub, from what I'm understanding and gathering from like the Ripperger lore, is just like another name for Satan, essentially, who's like, you know, the king of hell and Catholic and Christian lore mythology. And he loves to talk about why Satan feels a certain way and what he feels and thinks about things. And it feels, honestly, like he's trying to psychoanalyze the devil or these like demons, which is really, really interesting. I've also been reading some things about how like there are some like there's rules and guidelines around like being an exorcist, performing exorcisms, how that's supposed to be done and carried out. The behavior and conduct of the people involved is a big part of that, which is something that, you know, is important to emphasize here for reasons that will become apparent later on. And one of those things that I've been hearing is that the church says that you're not supposed to be like engaging in like lengthy discourse with these like alleged demons that you're like exorcising or whatever. But based on what Chad says in this interview, he talks to the demons a lot, and that seems to be where he is getting like the bulk of his information from, which is really, really, really interesting. Again, the Catholic Church has absolutely nothing to say about how Satan feels about anything. Just putting that out there, too. Then they get into this whole like topic of demonic redemption. Shawn Ryan's asking Chad about demonic redemption, and Ripperger believes that he gets into this like tangent about how he believes that humanity, people, are inherently stupid, and this doesn't seem like it's in like the hair splitting sense of like what the Catholic Church teaches, which I like again looked this up just to refresh and make sure I was correct in my memory. But like, you know, the Catholic Church teaches that if you commit a sin, the sin can damage the human spirit and can induce a kind of like moral stupidity. It like dulls your like moral edge, basically. It like tarnishes your spiritual life and everything, and like can have an impact on the rest of your life as a whole. But that's a very like kind of hair splitty. The church has not ever come out and said like, oh yes, people are stupid. For all that, like comparing religious like communities, lay communities, to flocks of sheep is like a very common trope within Catholic and Christian like art and everything. And sheep are not known for being particularly bright. The Catholic Church is not out here saying that humanity is stupid, but Chad Ripperger is saying that humanity is stupid. And I just think that is really interesting, because in a little bit later on in the interview, it's like he says that people are stupid and we're easily tricked into making these like mistakes and falling for the tricks of the devil and everything. But then he also seems to expect people to be able to like just snap themselves out of whatever sort of like oppressive stupor or problem it is that they're dealing with. And so he's walking a fine line there that kind of seems to be self-contradictory, but I don't know that anybody has pointed that out to him. And certainly Shawn was not going to point that out to him in this interview. I mean, like I said earlier, it's basically like just word vomit for 4+ hours from Chad, with occasional minor interjections from Shawn Ryan. But Shawn Ryan never like challenges Chad on anything that he has to say. I also, like I have been saying, you know, Chad speaks with such like authority on all of these like subjects pertaining to the demonic, and I have yet to see like any references. He never references or cites any sources that add any credibility to the things that he's saying. Like he doesn't really reference scripture. He's not really referencing like specific line items of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I mean, maybe occasionally he'll like throw in a reference to like Thomas Aquinas or like some Thomistic natural law mumbo jumbo thing, but like it's never presented in a way that adds like critical support to a point that he's making. It's more so just kind of like in there thrown around, just like a big word salad basically. And he has these proclamations. The ones that I think are the worst are the proclamations that he makes about people, about like women and LGBTQ people. Because spoiler alert, I don't think he likes either of those two groups. He hates women, seems to think women are these like disgusting sensuous creatures that like need to be kept in their proper place and order in order to be like kept under control and for like society to function and everything, which is just really, really toxic and incorrect and misogynistic. And then he speaks about gay people and talks about like what very often happens to adults engaging in consensual activities with other adults, but he doesn't bother to extrapolate on any of it. He'll just say, oh well, you know, these people who are engaging in homosexual activities, it very often becomes demonic. And it's like, what do you mean? What are you saying? Do you hear the words that are coming out of your mouth right now? What do you mean gay people are demonic? Like that's the essential like implication being made there, is that like, oh, these gay activities are like demonic, and if you're a gay person engaging in consensual activities with other people, that like that's inherently demonic, which what? Again, no reason or logic given. He just says it like it's a matter of fact, and he gets no challenge for that. And so I guess we have to assume that Satan told him directly. And it seems like in general with all of this stuff, if Chad can't understand it, if Chad doesn't like it, then it must be a diabolic diversionary tactic or a demonic force of some sort. Like I said, it's literally like it's the demons. It's the demons. Ripperger seems to believe, it appears to me, that demons are like these inherently intelligent and basically have like all of the intel possible to make fully informed decisions. But he concludes his like long-winded diatribe about how demons think and feel by saying that demons chose a figment of their imagination over reality, which completely undermines his thesis that demons are these perfectly clear-sighted beings exercising true informed consent, even though they ostensibly would have known that obeying God would have been in their best interests if they actually did have that true informed consent and all the insight and intel and everything, like he led with saying that they do. Like, when you actually start trying to follow his logic and follow his train of thought, it dead ends to nowhere and oftentimes ends up kind of undoing what he led with saying. And I am not interested in trying to read logic and reason into the things that he said. This man had 4.5 hours to present a coherent idea, to try to come up with some you know, kernel of wisdom that is in some way representative of fact. And in my opinion, he completely failed to do so. Catching up with my notes here, it's just it blows my mind. I had to take my time going through and getting through this interview because I could only get through so much of it before I would read something that would just like send me off on a rant. And I spent a lot of time ranting about different things that he has to say in this interview because the logic is not logicking in any way, shape, or form. Again, with the aliens and the UFOs and the demonic agendas, this continues to come up throughout the podcast. Like, they were really fixated on this. And I think maybe it was because somebody in the Trump administration or like in DC had said something about them releasing like UFO files. It was like a diversionary thing to try to distract from the Epstein files, I think, is like what people were kind of assuming it was, because it seems like they wave that under everybody's nose anytime it's like things are getting a little too real. It's like, we got aliens. And what do you know? Now people are like getting distracted and hyperfixating on the aliens. And you know what? Sure. Let's spend precious time talking about how aliens are demonic, instead of talking about the actual real crimes and like human rights abuses that are being exposed in real time. But we can't talk about those things because Chad hasn't actually been engaging with those things in a way that would permit him to have an educated and insightful and fully formed opinion on them. So we get the UFOs and the aliens and the demonic agendas. And I think, honestly, the reason why Shawn Ryan does not press Ripperger on any of the fantasy that he's spinning in this interview, because I do, again, in my opinion, I think it's fantasy, is because Shawn has already bought in. And there's this quote I wrote down from this interview where in this transcript where he says, "So yeah, I mean, we've talked about it several times, and I believe it too, that all of this stuff is from a spiritual realm." So Shawn Ryan is not going to challenge Ripperger to explain how it is that, you know, he knows how demons are feeling about things. Doesn't bother to challenge him on the fact that he says that, you know, gay people engaging in consensual activities are demonic. What, like, doesn't challenge him in any way, and it's because he's bought in. He believes everything that Ripperger says, and for what it's worth, Chad is not the first person from this celebrity ecosystem sphere that Shawn Ryan has had on the Shawn Ryan Show. He also interviewed Dan Schneider, which is another one of these guys who is affiliated with Chad Ripperger. Haven't really gotten to talk to him about him yet, but like, trust and believe he's there in the background. So I think that for Shawn, this is just like more information for him to take on board to confirm what for him is a foregone conclusion, which is a little bit scary to me because people, I think, view him as someone who wants to critically engage with the really tough questions and conversations that are affecting American society and our world today. And he positions himself as someone who will, you know, really knuckle down and do the hard work and call people out. You know, he loves to do the whole call out thing. He had that whole like call out deal that he did when Camp Kanakuk tried to send him a cease and desist for interviewing someone who's done a lot of work to like raise awareness about the abuse in the whole Camp Kanakuk situation, which, if you don't know about that, holy shit, Batman, that it's crazy. It's a Catholic camp, hugely popular here in the United States. Unfortunately has a really tragic legacy of like systemic child abuse, and Shawn Ryan has like interviewed the people affiliated with that, and then Camp Kanakuk people sent him a cease and desist, and he did this whole call out video where he was like, you know, you're not going to silence me and blah blah blah, very much being like, I'm a hard target, I'm here to call people out, I'm here to have the hard conversations. But when it comes to this kind of thing, when it comes to spiritual and religious stuff, apparently his willingness to be critical completely flies out the window. And I think it's a little bit concerning when somebody who claims to be such a critical and analytical person who's like critically analyzing these subjects is willing to completely suspend their critical thought for something just because it's spiritual, or just because it's a religious matter, or just because the person that you're talking to is presenting themselves as an expert, which like anyone can present themselves as an expert, but that doesn't make it so, and it also doesn't make the things that they have to say true. And I think it's really unfortunate that Shawn Ryan, who has a very successful show with millions of viewers, really is being a part of the problem here instead of a part of the solution, because I think there are ways to have productive conversations, and even to talk about things like exorcisms and demonic possession, if those are things that you believe in. But it can't be done at the like subversion of everything else, of reality and of scientific fact, and particularly not when it starts impacting groups of people, innocent groups of people who never asked to be the target of your vitriol. So, moving on with this, they talk about levels of occult involvement among the elite. This is giving satanic panic, which does nothing to help victims who actually have been harmed by these pedophilic elites that we see being exposed. I do believe, because numerous victim survivors have come out and said as much, that there are these like elite groups of people, and that within society, at a certain level, you get to a certain point, it's like pedophiles all the way up to the top, and they engage in all kinds of perverse and disgusting, and yes, even ritualistic practices. And I believe that that is 100% true. But the way that they chose to have this conversation, I don't really think that it's helping to move the needle forward towards like more better justice for victims. I actually think it could do the opposite, because now it's, with this conversation and the way that Chad decided to approach it, it's not about advocacy policy or legislation intended to target real crimes and criminals. Now it's just this squishy conversation about diabolic diversionary tactics and Beelzebub's fifis. And I can assure you that what Chad thinks should be done to tackle these foes will do fuck all for the real people who are actually being harmed by real predators committing real and horrifying offenses. Okay? Like, it's not going to do a thing. I am so sorry to say. And this is where I think the rubber hits the road for me, because why someone is doing something matters a lot less to me than the thing that they are actually doing. It's not completely unimportant in the grand scheme of things, but it's not the first thing, okay? Because why they do something matters less than the thing that they're actually doing. And I don't really care if these elites are doing it because of Satan or Baal or the fucking flying spaghetti monster. I don't care what they think they're worshiping. I don't care what they think they're engaging in. I want them apprehended. I want them charged to the fullest extent of the law. And I want them incarcerated in Gen Pop, frankly, for the rest of however much of their disgusting lives remain after that point. Because, whatever, prison rules. I think that would be a good outcome, frankly, for a lot of these monsters. But as far as I can tell, neither Chad nor Shawn are doing anything to move the conversation in that direction. There's been a woeful lack of accountability or justice here in the United States, particularly just in regard to this whole Epstein thing. But it goes much, much deeper than that, with justice being real justice and reform being denied to the people who need it the most. And it's really, really infuriating, and my tolerance for it anymore is quite low. Chad says that demons are getting more powerful and are attacking families, apparently. his evidence for this appears to be that like he's speaking generally, like almost like hypothetical terms about this family where like they raise their kids properly and all of a sudden their kids just out of the blue just go off the rails and they can't seem to get too much done with it. And then that's it. That's like his evidence for the fact that there's demons involved, is the fact that a family with children growing up through the teenage years are dealing with upheaval and personality clashes and struggles. For him, it's demons. It's for him. It's not social things that need to be hammered out. It's not like familial things that are at play. It's not like hormones and like your mental health, which really can take a hammering during your like teenage years when you're going through puberty. Nope, none of those things, guys. It's demons. Demons are getting more powerful. And that is his proof. And he thinks that it's all, of course, leading to the rise of the Antichrist and the end times, which feels very like death culty to me. Like I think there's like a death culty kind of undertone to a lot of this. And he uses a portion of this interview to extrapolate basically on his lore on the spiritual and mystical arms race that he seems to be pretty convinced and pretty determined to convince his audience is real and threatening and requires consumption of these books and courses and retreats and protocols, which you are all accessible via paying fees, of course. Because fighting demons is expensive work, guys. He also apparently wants people to believe that he is a subject matter expert on all things Mark of the Beast, which is a very interesting belief to be seeing entering like Catholic circles. Historically, I had always kind of associated like the whole Mark of the Beast and like Book of Revelations terror and stuff with like more evangelical Christian talking points, but it's like also being fostered in like conservative Catholicism as well, which I find really, really interesting. But he has admitted that when it comes to like the Mark of the Beast, which there is like some Catholic like writings and stuff on, he admits though that he hasn't read many of the church fathers, who are the people that are credited with creating the dogma and doctrine for the religion that he is in, right? For the religion that he is a representative of, essentially by virtue of the fact that he's wearing a cassock and a collar and presenting himself as a Catholic priest. He wants us to believe that he's a subject matter expert, but then he'll turn right around and admit that he hasn't even really read that many of the church fathers. And I'm going to go out on a limb and speculate that the reason for that is because he doesn't view like many of these teachings as valid. I believe, based on what I have heard and what I have read, that he's one of these like pre-Vatican II diehard, Tridentine conservative traditionalist Catholics, these like hardliners who want the Catholic Church to return to a pre-Vatican II condition in like many different ways, from the top to the bottom. And so I have a feeling, I suspect that he simply views a lot of church teaching as like inconsequential and inaccurate and not worth his time to consume. He only refers to the ones that he has read, but he can't cite any of these church fathers or any of the sources that he's referencing, of course. So we have to take his word for it. And he and Shawn just continue to bang on about the Mark of the Beast, which I have to say, based on what I was reading and researching, is not a real tangible thing. The Catholic Church doesn't teach that the Mark of the Beast is like this physical, tangible thing, but it's more of like a general trend in like society and in the world towards sinfulness and away from God. It's almost like a philosophical device, more than it is like an actual physical thing that people are all going to be carrying around on their foreheads. But Chad seems to believe that the mark of the beast is like a literal and physical thing. He says, quote, "It's going to be something in our bodies like Neuralink, or it could just be something like an RFID chip." So he believes it's actually something physical. Again, where he's getting that idea from, I'm not really sure. I guess he's entitled to believe that, but just so you know, that's not something the Catholic Church teaches. They talk about demonic influence and possession quite a bit as well. Obviously, I would say that probably underpins 85% of the interview. And while the Roman Catholic Church does teach that things like sin can essentially open a person up to demonic influence, that is far from straightforward or simplistic. But Chad wants to take things all several steps further by personifying these alleged diabolic activities. And so that's where we start to see the appearance of the demon of fear, the demon of flight, etc., etc. And he likes to simplify normal human emotions like anger as demonic too. He was saying in this interview how like just being angry, apparently having like a sudden burst of anger is like a demonic thing, which like as someone who has done their fair share of like cognitive behavioral therapy, talking therapies, sometimes, let me just say that I've learned that sometimes a sudden strong emotion coming up seemingly out of nowhere isn't really coming from nowhere at all, is triggered by an external or internal trigger that you have not yet learned to identify, and is actually a sign, a symptom, your body trying to tell you that something is wrong for whatever reason, and not paying attention to that, just trying to suppress that, trying to force it away, trying to just like pray it away instead of like actually dealing with the feeling and what it's bringing up. That can have really negative consequences for a person's life in the long term. So, you know, what do you think happens when normal human emotions are like, and also conditions are like just chalked up to being demons? This would be a great time for me to mention as well that aside from degrees in philosophy and theology, like I said earlier, Chad does not appear to have any education or credentialing in any type of therapy, assessment, intervention, or human behavior. I looked this up multiple times. I've looked this up multiple times in the past, trying to see if he has any, even like a certificate. If he does, it's not publicly listed anywhere, which I think is a bad sign, not a good thing, because he talks a lot about like mental things. And I'm not sure that he is fully qualified to be speaking in the way that he is, particularly when you consider the fact that he has this ministry where he and other people who we can presume have the same perspective and attitude towards all this stuff that he does are interacting with people who are coming to them for help because they feel like there's something wrong that they need help with, and they believe are believing for whatever reason that it's demonic. So that is really concerning to me. But again, this lack of credentialing, has not stopped him from continuing to like talk about this stuff. And in regard to helping families convinced that they are under demonic attack, Chad's sage words of wisdom are as follows. I wrote this down, quote, "Sometimes if people just stop whatever activity has been deemed to be attracting demons, then what you'll find is that the demon just doesn't have anything to use against you. We actually find this very consistently in families. For example, if we tell the guy, quit being effeminate and man up and actually be the head of your household, and tell the wife, submit in a rightly ordered and loving fashion to what Christ intended for you. Just establish that right order. Stop the sinning of usurpation on her part and stop the sinning of capitulating your authority. Just stop that." End quote. So And this goes back to what I was saying earlier, where he says that, demons are supposedly so clever, and it's so easy for humans to be tricked by demons and to become basically susceptible to demonic control, because humans are inherently stupid. But then he also wants people to just stop, just knock it off. Whatever it is that's causing you problems, just knock it off. And I think that it's really, really interesting that the signs and symptoms that he is indicating in this quote are the things that are causing the problem, are things like telling the man to quit being effeminate and man up, and then telling the woman to submit in a rightly ordered and loving fashion, which really, to me, is just screaming misogyny and homophobia, honestly. Like, it's not actually looking at the unique conditions that the people are dealing with, what it is that is impacting their life. It's being boiled down to like very simplistic, very, again, misogynistic and homophobic ideas. And I am baffled by how this is supposed to help anyone who is like legitimately looking for help with like inner turmoil, domestic unrest in their home, whatever. And it doesn't get any better whenever they start talking about oppression. And in this interview, in general, what Chad had to say about like what oppression is and everything, that lined up with like what I was reading that the Catholic Church also teaches, which is great, but there isn't really a lot that the Catholic Church has to say, which I think is why, when it comes to like the subject of like demonology and exorcisms and everything, why there is so much room potentially for Chad to editorialize and like kind of take some interesting liberties with certain talking points, just because there's room for to flesh it out, basically. And it all devolves from there, really, because then when they move into the topic of curses, it becomes really clear that Chad believes that the curses and the demonic oppression are like the reason why the world that we're living in is the way that it is. And what I mean by that is they start talking about like the subject of cursed media, okay? And according to Chad, he said that like something like an earworm, like a song that gets stuck in your head, it's called an earworm when you can't like get the song out of your head. That is like a demonic thing. And it's not like because a song is overplayed or because it's catchy. If it gets stuck in your head, it's because it's actually demonic. And porn, from his point of view, is not addictive to some people because it triggers pleasurable sensations and our dopamine receptors. It's actually addictive because of curses and demons. Okay, so are you seeing how like all of these very complex situations, like, domestic problems in the home, which are always going to be nuanced and difficult to understand, or social unrest, or any type of like personal unhappiness, it all gets boiled down to curses and demons. And to really drive these facts home, Chad blames a particularly nasty bout of gout that he endured on a woman who he claims was allegedly possessed and allegedly cursed him. So he was talking with this lady, and she was allegedly possessed and didn't want to accept his help, and she ended up cursing him, and the proof that she had cursed him was that he had a really bad like gout flare up, and that was why he came down, was because she cursed him. And it doesn't have anything to do with genetics or pre-existing conditions or poor dietary and lifestyle choices, which are all reasons why gout can occur and why you can have like flare-ups and things. No, it's demons and it's curses. And Chad offers nothing in the way of evidence here aside from just his personal anecdote about this like gout episode that he had and this lady. So we have to take his word for it. And I think that what looks to me like an overactive imagination and like the satanic panic of the 1980s is perceived by Chad as nothing but further evidence of cursed media and demonic influence. So like the entire satanic panic and like the whole thing with rock and roll and there being like satanic messages in the songs if you played them backwards and all this and that, it's all because of like these curses and these possessions and this like cursed media that is taking over the world. And that is a really interesting perspective for someone to take, and I have no idea. Again, he seems to be just coming up with this stuff kind of off of the cuff, and will like say that like some demon told him this, or he had an experience with someone who was allegedly possessed, and like that is his proof. And he's like making very strong claims and also like promoting some really toxic rhetoric about people as like the justification for it all. But he's offering nothing in the way of like substantial evidence. And I don't know why it's acceptable for him to do that, when if anyone else tried to do that, like if I tried to do that, to come on here and just start making claims and saying things and talking out my ass, I would be reamed up one side and down the other. Like I would not get away with it. Most content creators would not get away with something like that. But when it comes to someone who is speaking on spiritual matters, it's like people's brains turn off. And I don't know why. Why are we required to take him at his word when he's saying some really extreme things and offering nothing but personal anecdotes as evidence? I've got a problem with it. Looking through my notes here, in this vein, again, they continue with the media and the idea that like media is cursed, and so consumers of said media, and we're talking like pop music and like popular entertainment and that kind of thing. The consumers of this media are then like demonically oppressed by consuming it and like the curses and the media, and so then the demons come in because they're now like weakened by the curses in this media. And Chad in this interview reckons that at least 25% of the American public is demonically oppressed, which would be about a cool 85 million people. And he knows this, quote unquote, because they keep statistics. But as far as I know, Chad is not a statistician, and hasn't like stopped him, obviously. But again, why are we expected to like take this figure at face value when he's not offering any kind of like substantial, not talking about any like research or studies, like any sort of like analyses, any sort of like anything really? He's just like throwing numbers out and like letting them have an impact, and people are going, oh wow, that's crazy. And then they keep it right on moving, and like nobody is calling him out for that. And so nobody has like really put up much resistance to stopping him or his like religious outfit, the DeLorean Fathers, from taking data, whatever data, wherever it's coming from, and just like running with it. And I think that Chad thinks that occultism is like conveyed telepathically to people, like this demonic download. Like, I'm getting into like the weeds here of the things that he's saying, but like this is stuff that he is saying in this interview. You can go through and like read or listen to it or whatever. Like, this is stuff that he's saying, and like I'm telling you, I don't know where he's getting it from. He's not citing any sources, and based on the reading that I've been doing, it's not even based on like actual Catholic church teaching. A lot of this stuff, again, I don't know where it's coming from, but he's presenting it like as fact. Like, one of these examples of this like demonic download like evidence for it is that the inventor Nikola Tesla, back in like the like around the time of the invention of the light bulb and everything, that guy, apparently, according to Chad, Nikola Tesla was not a brilliant inventor or scientist. He was just connected to the demons, and he got demon downloads. And that's where he got all of the information for his like inventions and everything. Not his intelligence, not his research, not science, demons. It was demons. And it's worth mentioning that in the Roman Catholic Church, demonic oppression must be treated with careful discernment, because trauma, mental illness, and psychological conditions, which the Roman Catholic Church treat as legitimate and are not the result of diabolic tampering, cause the kinds of emotional states and reactions that Chad claims are evidence of demonic obsession and oppression. Okay. And so, like, whether like someone having a brilliant invention, I don't know. I guess it's because he thinks, maybe, I'm speculating here. I have no way of knowing, because again, I'm not interested in trying to read in logic and reason here, but just trying to follow his own logic and reason is very difficult. But I guess it makes sense if he thinks that people are inherently stupid. Obviously, Nikola Tesla couldn't have been a brilliant inventor and scientist. It must be demons. And obviously, if you are having like obsessive thoughts and you like can't stop thinking about something, or you have a song that's stuck in your head, you're obsessing over it or whatever, that's not like a mental thing. For Chad, that's demons. And like mental tunnel vision, demons. Experiencing intense and recurrent emotions seemingly out of the blue, demons. Like all of these complex subjects end up boiled down to one thing, and it's just demons. And I cannot follow the logic, because I'm really not convinced that the logic is there. Reading on here, I started this whole thing out talking about religious OCD and scrupulosity, but I want to remind you again, just now that we've like read through some of this and you've heard some of the like things that he's attributing to demonic like activity, that religious OCD and scrupulosity, being a subtype of obsessive compulsive disorder, is where you have these intense fears about morality, sin, or offending a higher power that end up dominating your thoughts and behaviors. And it's a true mental health disorder that turns faith into fear. And if it's left untreated, if it is not addressed comprehensively, correctly, right, religious OCD can negatively impact a person and their life to such an extent that other conditions like anxiety and depression can worsen and result in unwanted and completely preventable clinical diagnoses like clinical depression, which is a really, really severe mental and medical diagnosis that requires very careful management. And it's would be like preventable in this case, if people who are suffering from like religious OCD are not steered down a primrose path that takes them further away from reaching a healthy and stable place. And I honestly, I don't feel like I need to carry like this whole line of thought to its inevitable conclusion, but I also want to just put this out here, that some of the stats that I read placed suicide in the number 2 spot for leading cause of death for people aged 10 to 34 in the United States. So there is a mental health crisis in this country, maybe in Western society as a whole. And this type of thing is doing fuck all to actually address the problem at its root, and it's leading people away from help and from solutions, and I have a major bone to pick with that. And for what it's worth, again, I have to say I don't mind like people having conversations about demons and demonology and possession and that kind of thing. Believe whatever you want to believe, but you don't get to completely ignore reality and science and medicine and completely ignore the very real like fact of like mental illnesses and that so many people are impacted by them, and the very myriad and often confusing ways that mental illnesses can manifest, which is why it requires people who are competent and educated to assess and help people like that. And that's something that should be getting brought up like at the beginning and at the end of conversations like this. I mean, anytime I even Google anything about the Catholic Church and like exorcisms and that kind of thing, I always see something in there about how the Catholic Church says that two of the first things that have to happen when someone is believed to be suffering from some sort of like demonic whatever is that they must see qualified, competent medical and mental health professionals first before they do anything else, before they see an exorcist, before there's any conversation about exorcisms or prayer protocols or anything else. They must see competent medical professionals. Why? Because it is well recognized, even the Catholic Church recognizes that mental illnesses can manifest in ways that appear to an untrained and uneducated person to be demonic, but are in actuality a symptom of a treatable illness. And that is something that does not come up in this interview whatsoever. And I think that is, I think that's a problem. I think that is a big problem, that at no point does the fact that someone needs to see competent medical professionals at some point before going down this path of oppression and possession, the fact that that does not come up, that's a problem. And Chad doesn't acknowledge like mental health in any way, shape, or form in this interview from what I read and from what I've seen. In my opinion, and based on the things that he said in other interviews, he isn't even liminally aware of the facts around mental illness and religious OCD and anxiety and depression and suicide and everything else. And if he is aware, he does not seem to care. And I suspect that, I believe, like it's a possibility that Chad would chalk most of the mental health issues that people are dealing with up to demons anyway. Even if he did acknowledge that these conditions are things that are happening, his conclusion would still be that the underlying cause are demons, because everything is demons to these guys. And even though he thinks people are stupid and unable to make sound spiritual decisions for themselves, he also seems to expect them to exercise perfect agency. And frankly, it's also giving victim blaming on top of everything else. And I have this quote here that I wrote down that I want to read that's from this interview talking about obsession. Okay. Quote, "So the way obsession works is that they're going to go through periods of crisis where they're obsessing about these particular things they can't get their mind off of. It can be anger or fear, or it can be anything. Self-loathing, all sorts of things. Even self-hatred. I tell people, look, that's what demons do. You gotta stop it. The longer this goes on, they're going to spiral downwards, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse, and eventually it gets to the point where they don't have hardly any periods of lucidity, and it's usually at that point that the demons will drive them to do something in that obsession." So again, based on everything that I have seen, Chad is not qualified to recognize or treat religious OCD. So still, I feel like he should know that what he just described in this quote that I just read to you sounds an awful lot like religious OCD, talking about these emotions and how that's what the demons do, having just like emotions like anger or fear or something like that, how you just got to stop it. And eventually it gets to the point where they don't have any periods of lucidity. Like someone going through the throes of like an anxious or depressive episode triggered by religious OCD will have like brain fog and like just be out of it. That's something that I was reading when I was looking up information about religious OCD. Is it can affect your like cognitive function at a certain point. That is a symptom of a worsening condition that Chad is not qualified to be able to identify in any way, shape, or form. And to him, it's just demons. And so what do we think happens if he manages to get his grubby mitts on someone who somehow skirted all of the protocol that's supposed to be in place in a diocese to safeguard someone who believes that they are demonically oppressed or possessed? And he gets contact with this person, and this person is not informed about any of these facts of like mental illness or anything, and Chad himself is not qualified to be able to spot them. What do we think happens when they all just continue to traipse down this path together, down the road towards, yes, this is definitely a possession that requires an exorcism? What do we think happens? I can tell you what happens unequivocally. And when we get to the end of this, which we're getting close, I'm going to share some examples of what happens when unqualified people get their mitts on people because of the demons, okay? It's important also, we can have a conversation about, the validity of the things that the Catholic Church teaches. I also think that there's a conversation about what the church teaches versus what is actually like in reality lived out in like the life of the church, and the dissonance between those two things at certain points. Those are all topics of conversation that are valid, but probably for a different day, because even just taking the things that the church says about the subject of like demons and everything, Chad is painting outside of the lines and again editorializing really like with impunity from my perspective, from what I am seeing. And I think it's really, really important to make people aware of the fact that this man who is presenting himself as an authority and as a representative of the Catholic Church is saying things that are not reflective of what the Catholic Church actually teaches. And that's a really big deal, particularly when you start getting into this territory where you're talking about someone who is going to be interacting with people who, in all likelihood, in all reality, because I've read that 99% of cases, the church admits, 99% of suspected demonic cases are actually a medical thing, that this is going to continue to hurt people, and people are not going to be getting the help that they need, and it's important to underscore the fact that like this is not in accordance with what the church teaches, and he is potentially going to be doing a lot of harm for the Catholic Church as a religious organization, because he is not a good representative of the Catholic Church. In my opinion, he's not representing the good of the Catholic Church, what good that there may be. He's definitely not representing the church's stance on like possession well at all, and he's adding in all of this other stuff. The Catholic Church, based on everything that I have been reading, urges discretion and discernment and caution on the part of exorcists during exorcisms. And it does not condone, and this is something that again I think is really important to call attention to, because I have nothing to go on here except what Chad is saying, but he says something at a certain point in this interview that really concerns me. And I want to point out the fact that the Catholic Church does not condone any sort excuse me, of physical assault on a person during an exorcism. Any restraint that is used should be solely for the protection of the individual. So we're talking to prevent a person from like harming themselves or like throwing themselves into walls or something like that. Now, I want to be very careful and say that I am not accusing Chad or anyone else of anything here, but I find the language that he uses at a certain point in this interview disturbing, and his apparent lack of compassion when interacting with the people seeking his help, really, really strange, as well as his air of nonchalance, like just really, really off-putting. And it's like I'm forced to ask, are we casting out demons or are we trying to break the human will here? There was something that he said, and I wrote this down. Let me find it. I thought that I wrote this quote down. Here we go. I skipped this section, but this like this quote here, I wrote this down because again, I am not accusing Chad of anything here. Okay? Like I don't know, wasn't there. I'm just going off of what he's saying. But the Catholic Church very unequivocally states that during an exorcism, there's not supposed to be any kind of like physical assault on the person, the subject believed to be possessed, and that if any type of restraints are used, it's purely to protect the person, the subject that is believed to be possessed, from like hurting themselves, you know, bashing their heads into walls or something like that in like a really crazy situation. A couple of times in this interview, Chad references behaviors that appear to imply that he became physical with an individual during an exorcism. Okay, and this is what he says. You can find this in the interview. He says, quote, "One time I was attacked by a demon of fear that was possessing a woman. When we went into the next session, I was able to bind that and hammer it, and then started doing what I call the piñata game. Okay, I've hit the thing. Now you just go around it and keep whacking it until you find out from different angles what more information you can get out of that particular thing." I'm so sorry, but by thing, I am assuming that we are talking about a human being, ostensibly the individual seeking help for some sort of demonic affliction. And again, I am so sorry, but this sounds like assault. He's calling it the piñata game. I'm not from Latin America or Spain, but I know what a piñata is, and I know what the piñata game is, and it involves hitting something with a stick until you get something out of it, a sweet treat, usually, in the traditional sense. But I don't think Chad's going for sweet treats in this situation here. In calling it the piñata game, saying that you keep whacking it until you find out from different angles what more information you can get out of that particular thing. Like, the language that he is using is really dehumanizing as well. And it's kind of concerning to me that like an exorcist would view a person who they believe is possessed as like no longer a person because they're under like some sort of alleged spiritual possession or something like that. That's a problem, guys. That's a big deal, and that's a problem. Are we casting out demons, or are we breaking the human will? The piñata game, Chad? Really? What is that? How does that work? Care to extrapolate on that? Are you aware of the fact that the Catholic Church says you're not supposed to be getting physical with people? Well, now, obviously, it should go without saying that regardless of what the Catholic Church has said, that has not stopped exorcists from getting physical with people to disastrous and tragic ends, unfortunately. We'll get there in a minute. that really just turns my stomach, frankly. Now, later on, towards the end of this interview, they start talking more about the hierarchy of the Catholic Church and all of these problems. And once again, with the same broad brush that he wants to paint every single socio-political, cultural, spiritual, and religious subject in, he does the same to the problems that are endemic to the Catholic Church. And he blames it specifically on a very familiar cast of characters. This is a cast of characters that I have been hearing about since my youth, since I was a child. These are the traditional scary boogeymen of the conservative Catholic religious right here in at least America. And that is the Satanists, the Freemasons, and the Communists, who, quote, got into the Catholic Church during the 30s, 40s, and 50s, end quote, according to Chad in this interview. So he clearly believes in the few bad apples fallacy, but the problem with that is that it ignores a cool 2,000 years worth of systemic abuse in the Roman Catholic Church, of which a very real paper trail exists. A fact which is verifiable. You can look that up. You can verify it using the church's own records, which is something that the late Dr. Richard Sipe et al. Did. You should look it up. Chad should look it up because he's clearly unaware of the very long history and the fact that it is not a few bad apples, as some would like to believe, and it is not some newcome sort of problem that sprang up just, it's in the age of modernity in a post-Vatican II world. No. That would be a very simplistic and very black and white and very easy way to look at things, but that is not reality. And the reason why it's a problem that people continue to kind of hang on to that is because, sorry to say, once again, it's not going to actually move the needle forward on helping people who are actually being harmed and victims who need justice. It's not going to do it. It's not helping in any way, shape, or form. Getting distracted by alleged Satanists, Freemasons, and communists is not going to actually address the issue at the heart of the matter. And guess what? That issue, these problems, have already been very sufficiently identified and tracked and discussed ad nauseum in scientific literature. Sociology and psychology and psychiatry have talked about these problems at length. You can find actual published scientific literature on it. We don't need to grasp and fumble around in the dark and try to find reason that fits around these boogeymen that continue to be brought up. Also, of course, the quote unquote homosexuals also always end up thrown into there as well. It ignores the entire problem, and it's really, really, really frustrating. I am begging you, if you are someone who is convinced that Satanists, Freemasons, and communists, and homosexuals, and feminists are the reason why the Catholic Church is the way that it is, or that the things that have happened, or that it has covered up the things that it has covered up, please take a second look. Try searching some different keywords. Just do a little bit of critical questioning, and you will very quickly find that the reasons are well known, and they've been well identified by numerous people for decades. Another demon that Chad likes to talked about in this interview as Asmodeus, who is apparently the demon of homosexuality in men. Lilith is the female demonic equivalent, but there's also Leviathan and Beelzebub and a whole list of other casts of characters. But the reason for bringing this up, once again, I mentioned a moment ago the homosexuals being accused of contributing to the problem. Just being gay, I think, is apparently demonic to Chad. He says at one point, quote, "I said to the man, 'Do you have any homosexual ideation?' He said, 'Yeah, I don't know where it's coming from,' because this guy didn't have any history that would indicate he would have the psychological problems endemic to homosexuality. He was a married man, had a beautiful family and kids, the whole bit. I found it interesting that the demon of sloth is under the demon of homosexuality because every homosexual I've ever met, they're soft." I think Chad has so much internalized homophobia and misogyny, sad to say, that it is just plainly impossible for him to meaningfully and critically engage with something like what being closeted and gay does to a person trapped in conservative religious authoritarianism. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that, again, in my opinion, I think that Chad hides from reality and maybe, potentially, possibly, allegedly, nope, I don't know, picking up a little bit of a vibe that maybe, in my opinion, he might also even be hiding from the truth of his own identity. And he hides under layers and layers of pseudo-intellectualism, fantasy, and religious delusion, because it is just far easier to just blame everything on demons than it is to engage in honest and educated discourse about our world and its many, many problems. Chad can't do that, so he has created a reality in which he and his other exorcist goons are in control and on top. And I think that Chad is actually probably a very insecure and fearful person, and his self-evident need to name and blame and build out his version of reality with every demon and angel accounted for adds to that feeling that I have. And since birds of a feather flock together, I think that Chad has had no problem attracting the kind of audience and following that he has, because these are also people who are probably fearful and feel increasingly out of alignment with the vision of reality that they were raised and educated to believe in as they are moving through reality here on Earth. And their world depends on people like Chad to keep interpreting the madness and assuring them of their moral righteousness. So that concludes this section of me going through and just like responding to the things that stood out to me from this interview. Again, this is not a point-by-point refutation. You should go through and have a look at the things that he had to say, especially if you are Catholic. Compare and contrast with the version of reality and the version of like spiritual life that he presents with what the Catholic Church espouses. And I think you will find that that there's quite a bit of dissonance there, and there are a number of reasons which I have tried to lay out here for why I think that that is a problem. Now, one interesting thing that I wanted to point out, I have a couple of last things to take you guys through. Thank you for sticking with me through this. I know it's been really, really long, but again, I think that all of this is important. And one important thing that I wanted to point out, because again, I'm going to keep hammering home the whole mental health thing, because I think that it really, that's what boils down to like probably the worst and the most concerning aspect of his rhetoric and everything, is just how apparently uneducated he is about mental health and the the impact that he could have, the very negative impact that the things that he says and that he could have on people who are dealing with undiagnosed mental health illnesses. So there were some like keywords that I went through this interview after the fact and searched for, and one of those keywords was mental health, and it only shows up once in this entire interview. Mental health only shows up once, and it's to give a nod off to one of Chad's books, the Introduction to the Science of Mental Health is this book. And this is the only time that mental health is mentioned in this entire interview, is to reference his Introduction to the Science of Mental Health book. And look, you can buy a copy of Introduction to the Science of Mental Health on Amazon for the low price of $110. Okay. So this is a paperback book, an introduction to the science of mental health, written by Chad Ripperger. I believe that has a foreword, by His Excellency Fabian Bruskowitz, Bishop of the Diocese of Lincoln, Nebraska. And there are several volumes within this text, which I guess is why it's so expensive. Those are some like truly like collegiate prices. And the the reviews on this book are really, really interesting. I wanted to take you down to one of them just because I think it gives a pretty good insight into what this book is, why people are seeking it out, and what people are seeing about it that they're liking. Let's see. Make my screen a little bigger so it all fits. So this was a review from someone who loved it, okay? And I think that the things that they have to say and the reasons for why they loved this interview so much tell us a lot about this book and what it is and why people are seeking it out. Okay, so I'm just going to read this to you. This is from Michael Chapman, whoever he is. He left us a review on June 21st, 2013. So this book has been in print for a while. I recently purchased this volume because I am involved in a ministry that helps individuals and families who claim to have demonic influence or be under attack. Okay, so this is presumably a lay person getting involved in deliverance ministry. Some of these people aren't, others of them genuinely are. What I have long needed is something like this work to flesh out a cogent understanding of human psychology that is from my faith's point of view, Roman Catholicism, and does not depend upon what I consider to be the pathetic underpinnings of modern psychology. I can say without reservation that this work more than fills that need. It is excellent. Father Ripperger's 3 volumes contained in this one massive book is an excellent resource for people like me who need a solidly orthodox and traditional big T response to the claims of modern psychology, especially with regards to accurate diagnosis in cases where psychological issues and demonic presence are confused, as they often are. Father Ripperger, who holds a PhD, offers far more than insight and help into demonic influences, however, and covers a huge range of issues with regards to the philosophy of mental health and illness. Demonic influence as it pertains to psychology is one small section of this book, although a very helpful one to me. One of the more fascinating sections comes at the beginning and lays the philosophical foundation for an authentic Catholic psychology. It is his explanation of who we are as human beings, a refreshing Catholic anthropology. We are not mere advanced animals. We are made imago Dei, in the image of God, and that should shape every aspect of psychology. Yet, psychology today denies this foundation, and thus its treatment and solutions are not working. How can it? For example, sin, because it mars the relationship of God and grace in our life, will naturally have an effect on our mental health. Of course, psychiatry and addressing chemical and physiological issues are one thing, but treating a directee patient with an improper and reductive understanding of what a human being of that human being that is in front of you is destined to result in less than optimal results. Father Ripperger brings a decidedly Thomistic approach to all of these, which appealed to me instantly, and replaces the woefully deficient psychology of Freud, Jung, and others with a cogent one. I think we found Michael's favorite word, and I think it's probably cogent. This work is very scholarly, yet clear and understandable, is well-sourced and footnoted with excellent explanations. If you are a Roman Catholic or a Christian who has thirsted for an authentic psychology and explanation of the human condition that fits solidly with sacred scripture and the teaching magisterium of the Church, this is where you need to begin. I recommend it wholeheartedly and refer to it regularly. Thank you, Father Ripperger. So that is the kind of feedback, favorable feedback, that Chad has gotten for this $110 paperweight. Quite expensive. If it weren't so expensive, maybe I would be tempted to try and buy a copy just to see what kind of things it has to say. I would be most interested in checking out the footnotes and checking out like the references, and if there are any references, what they are, where they are, the quality of them. If you have access to this book, and you feel like doing some like homework for free for me, and you want to like let me know what it contains, and like the footnotes and everything, the sources that he's apparently citing, because apparently it's so well footnoted and everything, definitely shoot that my way. You can send me like a DM or something on like Instagram. I'd be very, very interested to know, but not interested enough to spend $110, and definitely I don't want to give Chad any money at all. At all. Because to be perfectly honest, while I do support a person's right to believe whatever they want to believe, like I said earlier, when it crosses a line and becomes a matter of life and death, and when it's causing harm to people, that is where I start to draw a line and have a problem. And so I just want to show you this webpage really quick. So this is a summary up at the top, and then it has more results below. But I Googled cases where people were killed because of an exorcism gone wrong. And this is a really unfortunate but incredibly real aspect of the whole exorcism, demonic influence conversation. People want to believe in these things, and then they start wanting to take actions that reflect the things that they believe, and it's hurting people. It's hurting people. It's killing people. And I want to talk about that. I've got this list here that I'm going to read, and then another webpage, because again, you are entitled to believe what you want to believe, but you don't get to completely take leave of all logic and reason. You don't get to make shit up. You don't get to present yourself as something that you're not, and you definitely don't get to escape responsibility when you put yourself on a platform and present yourself as this authority on a subject, to then be saying the things that you are saying, which so clearly, I think it should be clear that the things that he's saying could be taken by someone and used in a way that is not helpful, and to put it mildly, is just not helpful. So there are, unfortunately, multiple documented cases involving deaths that resulted from exorcism rituals, often characterized by physical violence, starvation, suffocation, or drowning. Which is why that part where in the interview Chad talks about the piñata game really just it made my stomach turn, because physical violence has always been a factor, has always been a feature of these exorcism rituals, and the negative outcomes that have resulted were completely preventable and tragic. really famous one, Anneliese Michael in 1976, was a 23-year-old German woman who died of starvation and dehydration after undergoing 67 exorcisms over 10 months. Her parents and 2 priests were convicted of negligent homicide. There's Jocelyn Guzman Rodriguez in 2011, who was a 2-year-old little girl in Virginia who was beaten and strangled to death by her father during an attempt to exorcise a demon. And he was sentenced to 20 years and 11 months. There's Kyung Jae Chung in 1997. A missionary in Los Angeles was stomped and punched until her ribs caved in, and she died of blunt force trauma during an exorcism. The exorcist received just a 4-year prison sentence. There's Marasika Irina Kornicki. I apologize if I mispronounce any of these names. She was a Romanian nun who died of suffocation and dehydration after being bound to a cross, gagged, and left without food and water for days. There's Terrence Cottrell Jr. in 2003, who was an 8-year-old autistic boy in Milwaukee who was suffocated when a minister sat on his chest during an exorcism. The minister was sentenced to just 2.5 years in prison. There's Zakia Latrice Avery in 2014. A mother in Maryland stabbed her 2 young children to death and injured 2 others while claiming that they were possessed. Janet Moses in 2013 was a New Zealand mother who drowned after 6 men and 3 women poured water down her throat for 3 days during a Maori cleansing ceremony. There's Amora Bain Carson in 2008. It was a 13-month-old baby in Texas that was beaten with a hammer, bitten, and I'm so sorry to read this, had her liver torn during a DIY exorcism. Her caregivers received life sentences. Susan K. Clark in 2008. It was a 58-year-old woman suffocated after her husband wrapped her in a blanket and held her to the floor during a home exorcism. And then Charity Miranda Martin in 1997 was a 17-year-old cheerleader who was smothered to death with a plastic bag by her mother and sisters during a 7.5-hour ritual. Statistics on global deaths specifically attributed to exorcism are not provided in the available search context here. However, reports indicate that children are especially likely to be suspected of possession, and vulnerable groups, including those with disabilities like autism or epilepsy, are frequently targeted. These incidents often involve mental illness misdiagnosed as possession, leading to brutal outcomes where the exorcist believes they are saving the victim from evil spirits. And maybe you can see how someone might convince themselves that something like a piñata game would be a necessary incorporation in a Catholic exorcism if they are totally bought in to the idea that it's all demons. Literally everything is demons. You can do anything you want. So last but not least, because I really want to hammer this home, this is a list on a website called Ranker. I don't know anything about this website. Don't take it with, don't take it as like fact or anything like that, but it's just a list of 15 other alleged exorcisms that went wrong. And again, this is just to continue to drive home the fact that this is a well-known, documented thing that has happened in the history of people believing in demons and trying to perform exorcisms on people. As long as that has been a belief and a practice, there have been people getting hurt and killed. And I think that that's something that needs to be kept at the forefront, because when you take leave of all sense and you deny that mental illness is something that people deal with, where do you think you end up? So we already know about Anneliese Michael. I mentioned her in the last list. Another is Bridget Cleary, who was an Irish woman murdered by her husband in 1895. There's Isra Zaroub, a 17-year-old Palestinian girl who died during an exorcism in 2014. There was nun Irina Kornacki in 2005. Apparently, I didn't know this, but the actor Morgan Freeman's step granddaughter was fatally stabbed 16 times by her then boyfriend Lamar Davenport in Manhattan in 2015. I did not know that. That is absolutely heartbreaking and so sad. There have been cases in other countries, like in South Korea and in Germany in 2015. The police discovered a 41-year-old woman who had been bound to a bed in a hotel room, gagged and beaten to death over the course of what appeared to be an exorcism. The Guzman Rodriguez exorcism turned murder of the 2-year-old trial. The 28-year-old Maryland mother, Zakia L. Avery, that we read about a moment ago. The list goes on and on. Both this page and this search page will be linked in the description in the source document. So if you would like to take a look at it or go through all of those searches and everything, then please do take full advantage. But that pretty much brings us to the conclusion and to the points that I wanted to respond to about this interview. It's really, really unfortunate. Something that I noticed is that after this interview, Chad and other celebrity exorcists were featured on a number of web pages, basically having their like ideas about this demonic battle and everything platformed. And an example is here on the New York Post, which, you know, I know it's the New York Post, you know, maybe not the best and the most like journalistically integral like legacy media entities out there, whatever, you know, whatever, but it's well read, it's well recognized. People know, they know about the New York Post, and here is an article on the New York Post from the end of this past month in March, talking about this like demand for exorcists that we're now seeing, and how and they're talking about this demon hunter. Well, who do we think it is? Who do we think it is? It's Chad. And why do we think maybe could it be because he was platformed on a massively popular podcast with millions of views, and so now that has in a way legitimized some of the things that he says to an audience of people who view the Shawn Ryan podcast as a like source of factual information about like real and prurient and like pressing issues affecting us in society here today. Like, I feel like you can kind of see how this all is like playing out in real time, and I don't love it because again, I don't know that like Chad is the best person to be representing the concept of like Catholic exorcism in the first place. And certainly the things that he is saying, like just what we've went over here, but there is so much more, guys. Like there is hours upon hours upon hours of audio video footage of him just like editorializing and creating and spinning fantasy that is like loosely based on like Catholic teaching and like Thomistic natural law, and it's wild. And I don't necessarily think that he's the best person, but he's who is getting platformed because he's being legitimized in the public eye by being on podcasts like the Shawn Ryan Show. And so I'm not going to read this article. I've talked enough about like the things that Chad has to say and why I find them dubious at best, but you can find this down below if you want to read it for yourself. And I just wanted to bring this up because I feel like, you know, it kind of like illustrates the point that I'm making, which is that like people with problematic perspectives are being platformed and like very little critical thought is being given to that, and I don't really see anyone pushing back against the things that Chad is saying in any kind of like substantial way, really, even though he is a very contentious figure and not well liked by everyone for all that he may be this celebrity exorcist. And I have not independently fact-checked and verified this for myself, so this is alleged. Take it with a grain of salt. You know, it's hearsay as of this moment in time, but I have heard that there are even Catholic dioceses that have banned him from like coming into and operating in their diocese, because there are like individual like bishops out there who are taking issue with him and his entire like program and what he's selling. But he has, up to this point in time, been given a sanctuary in the Archdiocese of Denver, under, it was Archbishop Aquila, I believe, who I also believe is going to be, or has already retired. So like someone new is coming in now. And who knows, maybe this new Archbishop is going to take a closer look at what the priests in his diocese are doing, and the shenanigans that they're getting up to. Because I really think that someone should. I don't think that I should be the one leading the charge on like an investigation into the claims and rhetoric of Father Chad Ripperger, celebrity Catholic exorcist. I don't think that that's not a good sign that I am here talking about this now, because really someone else should be. But if no one else wants to, I will at least point out the things that I am seeing that don't make sense to me, the things that I think are problematic, the areas where I think, you know, if you are someone who has listened to Chad in the past, or is a fan of the Shawn Ryan show, or who like seeks out interviews with people who present themselves as authorities, to just remember to like actually listen to what they are saying. Don't just listen for the confirmation bias. Don't just listen for them to say things that are going to confirm your worldview and how you feel about everything. Actually listen to what people are saying, and what they're not saying, and who is being platformed and who is doing the platforming. Pay attention to this stuff, because this is getting presented to people as like entertainment media to consume, that then ends up feeding into a lot of stuff, and potentially I'm concerned some really unhealthy stuff, especially for people who are suffering from mental illnesses. And we know that, you know, there's going to be people who are suffering from a mental illness who believe that they are actually suffering from some sort of like demonic thing. And people need to know that mental illness is a very real like cause of some of these strange and bizarre symptoms, and we need to have people who are in the right places to be helping people, instead of leading people down a primrose path of just saying more prayers, which is not going to help a religious OCD person, to just spending more money, which again is not going to help, and to just contribute to word vomit without any kind of like actual substantial like any like just like substance to what is being said. I think that just it needs to stop. And so I'm here to call that out, and I'm going to continue calling it out going forward. So thank you so much for bearing with me through this. I know that this was long. Oh my gosh, if I tried to go through and just respond to every single point in this interview, this video would probably be like 6 hours long. I mean, who has the freaking time? I mean, it's the volume of language here is just astronomical. So thank you for sitting with me while I worked through this. I think that this is important. Please give me your thoughts down below. Give me your thoughts on Chad Ripperger. Give me your thoughts on like deliverance ministry and exorcism. Where do you land on the like possession versus mental health conversation? How do you feel about like the whole concept of like the celebrity exorcist? Is this a world that you know about, or are you kind of just learning about it for the first time? Definitely interested in hearing what you think just in general. So please let me know down in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up, and please consider subscribing if you have not already. I sincerely appreciate everyone who has thus far. Details to connect with me on social media, learn more about my work, and support my endeavors are all linked in the video description below. I will have a new video in the not too distant future, but in the meantime, hang in there. Thank you for being there, and remember, nolite te bastardes carborandorum. Don't let the bastards drag you down.